Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, the podcast that delves into the diverse and impactful roles scientists can play beyond the lab. With me, David Mendez. Today, a returning guest, Sue Ashford. Sue is the Michael and Susan Jandernoa Professor in the Management and Organizations Group at the Stephen M. Ross School of Business of the University of Michigan. She was previously taught at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College and received her master's and PhD degrees from Northwestern University. Sue's passion is using her teaching and research to help people to be maximally effective in their work lives, with an emphasis on self-leadership, proactivity, personal growth and leadership, and its development. Last time Sue was on the show, we talked about her book, The Power of Flexing, but on today's episode, I'll be talking with Sue about her research on highly performing self-employed professionals, a study that has taken some time to write up and that Sue found resonated a lot in the academic community. Sue, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this very interesting study?
It's research on people who work independently outside of organizations on their own. And as I presented this research around and about at different universities, the most common comment was, "Oh, that's me as an academic." Those findings of people who work on their own is like me as an academic. And so I got invited to do a workshop presentation for, it was called the Halfway There Professional Development Workshop. And it was for PhD students exiting the class part of their PhD and starting into the more nebulous, find your own idea and figure it out and get a dissertation. And the set of ideas that I learned from these, I call them high-skilled gig workers, were so applicable to PhDs exiting the classroom part and going on to the more self-directed part that they had me back every year for several years to talk about it. So that's the research. It's we interviewed independent consultants to businesses, independent coaches who coach business people, independent graphic designers, some jobs that are sometimes done in business or sometimes done outside of business independently, all the way to novelists whose books you've seen in airports, artists, sculptors, etc. The only thing about them is they did their work independently. This is my project that was the longest from idea to publication, and that length was 34 years, which could be discouraging to people, but it's not 34 years of active work. But I had this idea in 1985. 1985, I was a brand new assistant professor, and I was struggling. The demands were unclear to me, and they were very high, and they were scary. And I didn't know what I was doing, all the things that assistant professors feel, even if they're not willing to admit. And my next door neighbor was a ceramicist. She made ceramics. And I thought, how does she do it? How does she get up on a dark Tuesday in January and go to her studio and do her work? Why does she even think it's important? Nobody is waiting. I've got people waiting for me, students waiting in class, faculty, colleagues waiting in a meeting for me to arrive. She has nobody, and she didn't even make functional ceramics like a mug or a plate. She made ceramic weird sculptor things. And then occasionally she'd have an art show. And I just wondered, how do people who work on their own without an organization and all it gives to us, it's negative in a lot of ways, but also gives us a lot of things. It gives us structure. It gives us a sense of place. It gives us an identity. It gives us someone to blame. It gives us built-in colleagues. She had none of that. How does she keep going? And so that was the seed. And then I went on. I did a whole bunch of other stuff, and I got tenure. I moved institution. I made full. I was asked to be a dean. I did that for 4 years. And when I was going back to the faculty, I said, I just really want to know the answer to my question in 1985. And so a doctoral student and I set out to do this research. And then it was just a comedy of lots of things in life. She got sick and left the field, and I went back into the dean's office, blah, blah, blah. And there was a lot of blah, blah, blah till the paper got published. But it was 34 years from having the insight that there's something different about those folks. There was no gig economy then. The paper ended up being called Agony and Ecstasy in the Gig Economy. But there was no gig economy when I started. There really was no gig economy when we did the interviews. We just happened to be on the front end of something that was growing to be a phenomenon in the middle teens of this century.
So you said something that I need to pick up on, which is that you presented this work, and the audience starting telling you, "Hey, this is me." So you found an audience, and that it was resonating with the population or with the demographic that you didn't expect. What was it? If there's like one or two elements or key elements that resonated with people, what was it that made it that academics resonated with this, which, like you said, was far departed from their reality in many ways?
In many ways. I mean, you could say, yeah, I'm an independent worker as an academic, but there's a lot of things you don't have to wrestle with, particularly as a tenure track and tenured academic, that you don't have to wrestle as where's my next money going to come from, right? Which is a huge one. You have an organization. I am a Michigan faculty member. That means a lot to me. That's an identity thing that you don't have. You have a job that's very explainable to other people. I'm a professor, whereas a lot of these people, like, I'm a writer. Oh, what have you written? Well, nothing yet, but it's coming. There's a lot of things that you don't have to wrestle with. But the things, I mean, if you ask me what element did they find familiar, I would say all of it. There wasn't one element. But let me tell you where the set of ideas starts. It starts with the absence of an organization. Kind of like in our society, joining an organization is the typical route. Deciding to work on your own is the atypical route. And it tends to breed some things, like you lack direction, like you don't have a boss saying do this, you don't have a tenure system that tells you what you need to accomplish by a certain time. You don't turn in your accomplishments for the year to anyone like we do in academia. So you lack direction. You have to make it up on your own. I'd say, like, what do you do when you're all you've got? Because these guys are all they've got. You lack support. You don't have a senior colleague who says, God, that paper was great. You might have a client who says, we want to hire you again, but it's much more spread out and intermittent. It's lonely. You're on your own a lot, Now, the world is moving somewhat towards this as we do more remote work, more all that kind of stuff. But we're writing this paper was published in 2018, and things were a little different then. So it's lonelier, and you have way more freedom. You can create what you want to create in your life. And then you have direct exposure to the marketplace. You decide, you make blue pots, and blue pots don't sell, you're in trouble. Well, all of those elements academics have to some extent. The support we get can feel pretty distant from us. Everybody around us is really busy. We don't have a direct boss that checks in with us or looks at our work. Our advisor sort of says bye after you graduate, and the good ones stay involved, but they can't do it to the level they did it because they have new students. It can be lonely, but we love our freedom. I mean, I decided not to be a dean because I love the freedom. So they resonate with those conditions, but they also resonate with the next step, which I think is most applicable to doctoral students and new faculty members, which is what the psychological reality that those conditions create.
One of the things that I observe with people who are still in graduate school or finishing it is in fact this issue of dealing with the pressure, the pressure of finishing, the pressure of publishing something original, and I feel that very often they get highly involved in the process of redoing, getting new data, doing new experiments, and that they often don't develop strategies or even language around understanding what's happening within their heads, within their minds. And this is why I think it's super interesting to have you here today to put some words on all of that.
So those are the sort of the structural conditions of being a gig worker, freedom, facing the market, lacking support. And they create two psychological realities that I think every doctoral student and junior faculty member can relate to. Precariousness is one. So, am I going to make it? Is this going to work out? Will I have enough money? Both their situation is precarious, but also, and this relates to even academics farther along, your identity can be precarious. So you talked about this transition, sort of you had to grow into it, meaning it's a period of precarity for the identity. But you take senior faculty who've stopped publishing, am I really an academic anymore? Or am I, in the business school, you're just a corporate shill, But precariousness lives with these people. And I think it lives with doctoral students in the second half of their PhDs. They're worried about, am I going to make it? Probably constantly. So that's one. And then also that precariousness is amplified by the fact that for these gig workers, the work is personalized. They decide to make blue pots, and that doesn't work. They'd have no one to blame. In an organization, you could say, yeah, I knew it was a bad idea, but, they made me do it. Here, it's just you. And so the precariousness, there's it's amped up because of that personalized nature. You just tried to write this kind of book and not that kind of book. Study this question and not that question. And so it creates a lot of anxiety. Both of those factors create a lot of anxiety that you have to cope with as you go through, your days and weeks of your life in the second half of your PhD or in the, in your early years, especially as an academic. And so that shows up. We saw a very typical pattern on a day basis, how that showed up. One is that they were hyper-focused on productivity. And maybe your idea about searching for more studies, this study, that study, was kind of like that. Am I being productive? Am I accomplishing things? Am I getting stuff done in the day? I wanted to read a quote on each of those things I mentioned, precariousness and personalization, because I think it'll help people to see, yeah, this is what I live. So here's on precariousness, and this was a programmer. He said, it's really dramatic working alone. It's really, really emotional work in a lot of ways. It's emotional because you own it. because you own your future. Every single day, you own your future. You're so directly accountable for every single thing that you do that it's remarkably rewarding, but also very stressful. And I think in the second half of the PhD, suddenly students are aware that, oh, I've got to decide. And whatever I decide, it's going to determine how I do. And then the personalization quote was from a writer. And he said, you become your work very much. If you write a good book, you're a smart person or a creative person. If you write crappy books, you're not very successful at it, and it wears you out. If it's a half-baked book, I feel crappy, When you achieve it, it's really great. And when you didn't achieve it, quite frankly, it's a failure. And you have to be able to accept that and also be able to realize that failure might define who you are to yourself.
Oh my, yes. I totally see where that aligns with the second part of your PhD. Totally.
It's scary. And so what we found this cycle that produced, where there was a hyper focus on productivity and really a focus on, am I doing my real work? Is the writer writing as opposed to sending out, queries or answering fan letters? Is the coach doing coaching or trying to get people to pay their bills? Because the gig worker has to do all of that, right? There's no billing department and there's no marketing departments. They have to do it all. And so they're like, how much am I spending on my real work? And if they're not spending much, it tends to produce a lot of negative emotions in their days. Anxiety, frustration, anger at themselves, etc. And those negative emotions then circle back and hurt productivity. All of a sudden you need to repot the plants, or you really need to exercise, you really need to go talk to so-and-so, when really you're just anxious about the work because it's defining you and it's solving your precariousness problem, but you don't know if it will. And so there's this whole system that gets started when you work independently on your own that sort of amplifies the negative emotions charge, and its distracting quality. Whereas if your work's going well, they describe, and I think all of us in academia have had this experience, at least I hope, where your work's going really well and that charges up all your positive emotion. And, my favorite memories of being an academic are leaving the building at midnight, just having been so excited about what I was working on. I just couldn't leave it. And, I remember reminding myself, this you need to remember, because this is amazing. So, so that's the situation. But if we stop there, it would be pretty depressing news for your audience. But
yeah, you're thrown at the deep end of the pool, and you need to leave with that stress of, am I going to be able to swim back to shore?
Yeah. Well, the gig workers, when we talked to them, and it was not like every single one of them, but it was more correlated with being more experienced working as in that style. They had figured out ways that they could kind of help themselves. And I think those ways would be really useful for your audience. But to tell you about those, I need to tell you about a theory called system psychodynamics. System psychodynamics is a theory that argues that we hold a lot of anxiety in our bodies and in our psyche. And we have anxieties like, will I make it? But we also just have literal existential anxieties. Does my life matter? Do I matter? Am I valued? Does anyone care? And we don't acknowledge those anxieties. They're kind of going on in the background. And system psychodynamics argues that systems can kind of amplify or mute the anxieties in their expression. And they do it by creating what psychotherapists way back when called a holding environment. And it was based on a parent and an infant. So the parent creates a holding environment for the infant. The infant is like taking some risks, but knows they can take those risks because the secure base of the mother. This was like way back. They acted like fathers had nothing to do with it, which of course we don't believe anymore. But the mother gave a secure base so the infant could venture out. And so we carry those same anxieties into adulthood. We just don't acknowledge them that much. And so organizations, a lot of recent writing has said, create a holding environment for those anxieties. That identity I mentioned that you have being a Michigan professor. My name is on my door to my office. So every time I see it, my subconscious says, you matter. They put your name on the door. I'm on the email distribution list for important things. I matter. People, if I don't show up for a while, even in academia, people are going to wonder. I get addressed with a certain title. All of these things create holding for our anxieties. So then you go out, you decide to work on your own. And I have friends who've decided to be an independent academic. That holding environment, if you think of it as a bucket, in the first case, it's a bucket that holds all the anxieties. In the second case, it's a very leaky bucket, and your anxieties are going to come leaking out all over the place. And so what we found is the things that these experienced gig workers did, the ones that described their identity as pretty firm, they knew who they were and they lived it, and they described their working life as more vital, they did things that served the functional value of creating their own holding environment. So they created what they needed for themselves to contain the anxieties that came from working in this style. So they did 4 things. They created 4 connections. One is a connection to other people. So people that elevated them and encouraged them and focused them. It might be if you're a writer, you were in contact with your editor. If you're a consultant, one person had an independent group of consultants that were independent consultants that got together and they would share. For academics, it's often a writing group where you get together and you share your writing. But basically, it gives you a place to be. If you don't show up to your writing group, somebody's going to wonder and check on you. It gives you others like you who understand what you're doing. It gives you people to give you feedback, gives you people to give you affirmation, people to give you support. And so for a lot of people, it was their spouse, and their spouse would say, yeah, no, you were built for this, keep going, kind of thing. So that's connection to people. So that one makes sense, right?
It sounds interesting to me because some examples you said are just one person, like a mentor or a spouse. But some of them, it seems to be kind of more of a small network of people who give you that security or that kind of village that's built in when you're in academia or in a company. But when you're working on your own, it's not built in anymore. You kind of need to nurture it yourself.
Yeah, build and nurture it and maintain it. Otherwise, it tends to fall apart. Whereas, I always liken it to, I grew up, there were 6 kids in my family. And so, I never had to think about whether I wanted to maintain a relationship with my brothers and sisters. I just went home to visit my parents and they happened to be there. You go to work and people just happen to be there. You don't have to think about, do I want to create a colleague set? But after my second parent died, we had to think about, are we going to be connected in our lives or not? And we've actually done really well. I'm pretty proud of us, but that's the problem that a gig worker has and that I think academics have is they've got to decide that it's important to have community and build it so that it happens, and decide that it's not a waste of time activity, that it actually is going to sustain you in important ways.
A question I have around that is, so there's a clear difference to me between, let's say, a mentor, an editor, someone who's kind of
a boss,
kind of a boss, but in a different way than in a company, but someone who is kind of pulling you up and, like you said, showing you your value and kind of confirming to you that you're on the right track. But it's different when you say a writing group. It feels more like a group of peers, but then you have a bunch of them that are maybe like-minded, that maybe they can agglomerate and gel for different reasons. It could be the subject that you work on, but it could also be that, like I said, you're like-minded. Your personality agrees with them, etc. Did you ask of the people you interviewed how they came up with building either of these types of relationships, these more one-on-ones or these more group relationships? Because I don't think it's evident to everyone. And if you're, like you were saying, very involved in finding your path and trying to do the right thing, and especially if you're an introvert, for example, it might be tough to even think of, okay, how do I build a small community? How do I find a mentor, someone who kind of can pull me up?
We didn't go into that much detail on that, although I'm sure there are psychological differences on that. We've continued, a group of us have continued on this research, and we have one paper we're working on right now on the relationships that happen for independent workers. And one of them might be helpful for your introverts, which are parasocial relationships.
Please develop that.
Well, my advisor was a very scary man, very clear, very direct, very sure of himself about what I should and shouldn't do. And that was one of the lessons I had to unlearn over my life, was that his was just one opinion. Turns out people think differently about it. But I would often think, what would Larry do? That's a parasocial relationship. You're not really in the relationship, but you know enough about that person to be guided by, what they think or the advice they would give, or this is an idea that Larry would love. So I feel a sense of affirmation, even though Larry is died, Larry's gone, or, your mentor didn't take the time to invest in you, but you've seen through a talk or two, you've seen a person you really admire, and you think, what would this, that person would love this track I'm on, and you can get the affirmation that way. And we found that people did that. The second connection that people build beyond people that helped contain their anxieties, etc., was to place, where they typically did their work. I live that. My office is full of tchotchkes that mean something to me, that tell me people are with me, that tell me I've accomplished this or that, that I know what I'm doing, that kind of thing. And people talked about that. A writer said, a novelist, she said, I put up some of my reviews and awards in a place that's visible to me. So when I'm stuck, I say, no, I obviously can do it. Clearly that's not available to brand new PhD students, but, you'll get an email from someone saying something, that could be put up on your wall. But it's not all about affirmation. Sometimes it was about bringing focus. Like one a novelist, other than the one I just talked about, he did all of his writing in a 6 by 8 foot shack out on his property. And he said that space contained him, contained his thoughts, so that he could be productive. If the space went any bigger, it didn't work. And so, another guy who was an independent consultant. So he's out there fighting for business all the time, trying to get someone to accept him and bring him in. And he said, my office looks like the cockpit of a fighter jet plane, with the technology I have. And you could just imagine this guy who's got to go out and fight in the marketplace to win the business, get the contract. His office kind of reinforces that to him, that you are a man of warrior, a man of metal, kind of thing. And I don't think it was conscious on his part. I don't think he said, "Oh, I've got to set my office up that way," but I think it probably served that function. Another she was a script writer, and she said, "I do all my raw writing in my bed." She said, my bed is, I feel cosseted and, sort of secure and warm, and that's where I do my writing. And then I edit later on the computer. So it's being thoughtful about place and what the place where you typically do your work is doing for you and not doing for you. Like, there are many times when I say you just have to take an hour and clean your office, because the messiness of your office is beginning to be reproduced in the messiness in your mind. So there's a lot of different examples. They did it different ways, but it's really attending to place and recognizing that place can make a difference.
And a curiosity on my side is, because you just mentioned messiness, how it can affect and can reflect on what you do. What's the psychological process behind, having a tidy working place and that leading to you be more in a right mental space to write, let's say?
I don't know. I just have recognized it as a pattern for me, that when my place is messy, my brain is messy. It may be that I get distracted by, sometimes I'll put all my mess over here because I'm looking at the computer here, and I keep this part neat and I do okay. So it may be a distraction. But I think if you honor your place and you're thoughtful about how you set up your place, you're honoring you, you're honoring your importance in the world, you're honoring the value of what you're doing, even if nobody yet notices it. My neighbor went off to do ceramics on dark January mornings. Nobody knew, nobody cared, but she honored it herself, and it made a difference.
I really like that idea of honoring, and because one of the dangers, when we talked about identity a few minutes ago, and one of the things that's a danger when you're in this situation of anxiety and trying to reach goals that you don't even know where the goalpost is that you may forget to honor yourself. You may put yourself on the shelf and say, okay, I'm going to focus on this. This is what's important. And I guess that's what leads a lot of young researchers, academics, to exhaustion, to burnout, etc. Honoring yourself and the power of having a place where you do that.
One way to do it is through your place, no matter how small. It's what you put in it, what you surround it yourself with, etc. Yeah. And the third one was, I'll go with purpose. And I'll leave the one that I actually think is more important, but I'll leave it till last because there's a funny thing about it. So purpose was, why are you doing what you're doing? Why do you care about the project you care about? And I said there was a long history of this paper getting out. And I'll use myself as an example, and then I'll use some of the gig workers. But part of that history was my student left the field. My attention was being drawn off. But also, I didn't totally know how to do qualitative research, even though I'm pretty experienced in the field. And so I get anxious about that whole anxious productivity cycle described me pretty well. But I was able to keep going because the people we talked to had such wisdom. they really had such wisdom about living, working, mattering. And so I wanted their words to be out to people. I wanted to get them out. And if I didn't keep going, they would die with me. And so that would be an example of how a purpose can help with the personalization, the precariousness, the productivity cycle thing. Is if you have a purpose, it helps you to keep going. They also talked about a purpose tells you what kind, like a consultant said, I have a really defined purpose. I didn't earlier, but now I do. And it tells me what work to say no to, what work to say yes to. It tells me, So, I think in academia, some people I know have a real purpose, like people who are doing research around DEIA issues, like they want to make the world better for those people. People who are doing work around sustainability, recognize that the world's, the biosphere is, declining, and they want to get the word out, as fast as they can. So, I think purpose can elevate what you're doing. One guy, he was a consultant to songwriters. That was his gig. And he said, I'm participating in America's song culture. Ronald Reagan says America is a song culture, and I'm playing a part in that. Well, that's like a very elevated rendition of what he's actually doing, but I think that portrayal helped him to keep going, that kind of thing. So connection to purpose can matter.
Makes a lot of sense. And one thing that I think people might misinterpret this is, I think what you mean is not to be confused with the goals that you have, weekly, monthly goals. It's something that's more 30,000 feet view, right?
It's the why that underlies those goals. Why do you care about getting that achieved in a month or a week? And some of it is getting a job, getting tenure. I don't deny those very pragmatic things. I will note that academia has a very long life after those things. And, you need to have something more than that to sustain you. But I think even on your way to tenure, having a purpose, something bigger, the why beneath all the task goals you have, can really help when times get tough.
So we now are getting to the fourth element.
The fourth connection. And we call them connections because we wanted to clearly indicate that the agency is in the hands of the gig worker. Nobody's going to do this for you. You have to make these connections. Your workspace can be ad hoc or it can be intentional, but it's going to depend on you. The fourth one, and I left it for last, not because it's least important, but because I'm frustrated by how we named it. We called it, remember, there's people, place, purpose, and we called it routines.
Oh, you need another P.
Why didn't we call it practices? Somebody else did later. I saw in a talk, and I'm like, darn it. But routines, I think, are really super important. Routines are kind of like the warden. One writer said, routines are the warden of accomplishment. That's a beautiful saying. So routines are everything from how you start your day to how you end your day and everything you do in between. After I wrote this paper, I was talking to someone and they said, there's a famous writer, and I just can't remember his name, but it was a long time ago, writing like after World War II. And he used to get up in the morning, put on a suit and tie, leave his house, walk around the block, come back to his house, walk up to his attic office, and start his workday. So that's a routine that says, I'm no longer in my home life, I'm now in my work life. Another routine might be how you end the day. we have a second article where we took these ideas and tried to apply them directly to academia. So we talked to a lot of academics about, well, what routines do you use? And this one person said that she always ends with a Post-it at the end of her day that she's going to attach to her computer, and the Post-it tells her where to start the next day. Because morning self wants to, look at the email, and maybe there's a link to Facebook, and so you go over there, and then you go to LinkedIn, and you da 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 da. But nighttime self knows that what morning self really wants to do is that. And so she'd write this Post-it, stick it on her computer, and then in the morning, the directive for the next day would be there. So routines might be, like I have a routine I use in my academic work, and these show up in that second article. These aren't so much from the gig workers themselves, but I have two desks in my office. I have the one you can see in this picture, and then over there's a round table. And I go to the round table when I'm doing deep thinking. And I do it in part because I'm away from all of the technology and the computer and the distraction. I take a pad of paper, I take my water bottle, and I go over, and I often will set a timer, and I make myself stay there until that timer goes off. And I'm thinking about the new research directions or the this or that I want to think about, but that is causing me anxiety. And I know it's causing me anxiety because I have thoughts like, I really ought to get that light bulb changed, So routine might be how you tackle your job. A routine might be like this morning, I came in and worked for 2 hours before I opened email at all. And, I've got 2 hours of good work in before any distractions came. So it's how you handle that. It's all sorts of different things that you do. And you might have a weekly routine, but you're thoughtful about your routines, and your routines support the work you want to get done.
Mm-hmm. So it feels to me like somehow routines are also this sort of, invisible vessel for the anxieties too, in a certain way, because they
invisible holding vessel.
Holding vessel, yeah. Yes, that was the term. And of course, all of the, if you think about, let's say Google, because it's the modern and very known and recognizable example, from what you hear, from what you see when there's footage, is they try to do all of that in building their offices and where people are going to work. You get there, and all of this is pre-made for you.
So they built in certain routine pathways that you will walk, etc.
Exactly. Well, the routines, the place, the people, a lot of this, to me, the objective seems to be giving yourself a sense of safety, physical, some of it, psychological, part of it too, emotional, especially the one about the people. But it's reversing that precarity that you mentioned at the beginning.
We have an arrow from the bottom of the model back up to the top. You can't reverse maybe at all doing this, but it has that effect. It's going to be making your identity precarity go down. To the extent you can stay on your real work and getting your real work done, it's going to make your financial precarity go down. Exactly.
I'm now noticing that we're really getting to the end of our interview. The time has flown, but I just want to kind of summarize my feelings and my understanding of what you shared, because you mentioned that you found this wisdom in these people, in these highly performing gig workers, and I feel that a lot of this wisdom, to me, and this is my interpretation, comes from the fact that these 4 connections that you mentioned, that they all tend to create, once you create them, it's there and it's doing that work of holding your anxieties, etc., organically. It's not once you've created them, there's no super high maintenance on that. It feels to me that that's the secret, and that's how this can help young scientists, young academics, is if you start step by step working on some of these, building a routine, setting up your place. And this is something that you do bit by bit, right? You didn't build your office all in one day. You accrued them through time. And I think the idea, if you're listening to this interview, if you're listening to what Sue shared, don't think, okay, now I have to build all of this for tomorrow. No, these are connections that you can put a post-it for yourself to start thinking of them. And once an opportunity arises, start building piece by piece each one of them, and they'll start working for you, giving you this kind of support, this basis from which to then project yourself in your professional life and in your personal life. I really, really, really like it.
Yeah, it fits with my book and our last discussion. These are small things that percolate in the background, but if you're not paying any attention to them, it can, you could have a better quality of life if you just paid a little, if you just remembered that it could be important. Like when I started writing my book, I wrote my why. Why did I want to write this book? And I went back to that document many times, because writing a book and marketing it and getting an agent and getting it published is just, it's a discouraging process until it's not, right? And so, and then writing a book is long. So dissertations are long. Why care about this topic? And, and that going back to that, just taking 10 minutes to write it down on a Saturday can really sustain you as you go back to it throughout that 2-year process.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. I think it can help and inspire, and clearly there's many reactions today live, which clearly show that this resonates with people in this community. And I'm really, really grateful that you gave me some another hour of your time to talk about this. It would have been a loss to not have had this conversation. Sue, just before we get to the end of the interview, you just mentioned your book. I think it's the right moment to share where people can reach out to you if they want to give some feedback on what you said or ask some questions, but also where they can find your book. What's the title?
Well, the book is called, I'll just hold it up, it's called The Power of Flexing, and the subtitle is How to Use Small Daily Experiments to Create Big Life-Changing Growth. Publishers like hyperbole. But it's really about small things you can do in your life that don't take a lot of time, that can help you to grow in the ways you most want to grow in your life. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it anywhere books are sold. And then to get in touch with me, I have a website. You're going to see a lot around the book, but you can get to me there at susanashford.com.
Perfect. And by the way, we had a whole conversation on the power of flexing, and it feels to me now that this is kind of a dynamic duo. People need to listen to that episode and to this one, and to kind of meld them together to be able to, if they haven't yet started on the PPPR, to use the power of flexing to start building some of this anti-precarity connections that you shared today. So this was a great conversation. I'm really, really happy that we could meet again. And I just want to thank you for your time and for all you shared here today.
You're welcome. Happy to do it. Thank you much.
Thank you for listening to another Beyond the Thesis conversation with me, David Mendez, and my guest, Sue Ashford. I hope you enjoyed all the gold nuggets that she had to share. I'm definitely going to go back to our conversation and take notes, because there was so much that's applicable to the community. If you like Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, and if you want to be in the credits for production of an episode, I am preparing the celebration of 5 years of Papa PhD with a series of special episodes. You can go to papaphd.com/donate. And if you mention that you want to be in the credits, I will add you to the list. Thank you for listening, and see you on another episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD.